Jobsite table saws, like this one, are lightweight and affordable, but out of the box, they're more suited for ripping 2x4s at a construction site than they are for doing fine woodworking projects. Today, I'm going to show you a few simple adjustments and upgrades you can make that can turn your Jobsite table saw into a machine that can hold its own against any cabinet saw. Like a lot of people, I'm woodworking in a small space, and a full-size cabinet saw just doesn't make sense for me. Jobsite saws shine because they're portable, cheaper than cabinet saws, and they take up a heck of a lot less space. But they also sound like jet engines taking off, vibrate a heck of a lot more, have smaller tables, except undersized blades, can't do dado stacks a lot of the time, and have minimal dust collection. The good news is we can fix a bunch of those problems. First things first, let's talk about blades. Ditch the stock blade that came with your saw. Most are low tooth count blades designed for rough framing, not fine woodworking. Upgrade to a 40 or 60 tooth combination blade. This is going to give you nicer rip cuts and cross cuts. If your riving knife allows it, aim for a thin kerf blade. It'll be much easier for the underpowered motor on your Jobsite table saw to rip through wood with a thin kerf rather than a full kerf blade. You're also going to want to look at upgrading your miter gauge. You can improve the miter gauge that came with your table saw by attaching a fence using the screw holes here, but ultimately these miter gauges are flimsy and inaccurate. Almost any aftermarket miter gauge is going to be a massive improvement over the miter gauge that comes with your saw. But one thing that I would suggest you look out for in particular is a miter gauge that allows you to expand and compress little washers on the miter bar. Miter bar slots on Jobsite table saws are notorious for being inconsistent or oddly sized. Having a little bit of adjustability on your miter gauge is going to go a long way to giving you a good experience. Out of the box, most Jobsite table saws are not going to be well calibrated, meaning the blade and the fence are not parallel to the miter slots. In a best case scenario, this produces inaccurate cuts or burning on your wood. In worst case scenarios, this can produce a lot of pinching or maybe even kickback. So next, let's talk about how you can adjust your Jobsite table saw to make sure your cuts are both accurate and safe. This is one of the rare times where I actually recommend grabbing a new tool. This is a dial indicator, and it's actually a digital dial indicator as opposed to the more analog versions you may have seen online. The nice thing about this is it actually rides in the miter slots on my table saw, and it allows me to really precisely measure the distance of the blade to the miter slot at both the front and the back of the table saw. Start with the tip of the dial resting against the body of the blade, not the teeth, since those can be uneven. Mark the spot you're measuring with a permanent marker, and then set the gauge to 0 at the front of the blade and slide it to the back and check the reading in the same spot on the blade. Looking at the digital dial indicator, I can see that my blade is out at the back compared to the front by about 0.004 inches or 0.1 millimeters. Now, for me, that's absolutely fine, but what if it wasn't? I had to take the table saw off of my cart because this is really hard to show. Check your manual for specifics, but every Jobsite table saw is going to have 4 or more bolts that, when loosened, allow you to change the position of the saw blade or the table in relationship to one another. On mine, there's 2 bolts right here. If I needed to adjust my saw, I would loosen those 2 bolts and then, using a rubber mallet or just my fist, bang the motor housing in the direction that I need to. You want to be gentle with this, but these things can take more abuse than you might think. I would keep checking my measurements on the dial indicator, and when everything was in alignment and parallel, I would tighten up the bolts. One tip I can give you is go a little bit beyond the measurement that you're looking for. When you tighten up the bolts, things are going to kind of shift a little bit. I can also use the dial gauge to make sure my fence is parallel to the miter slot as well, and I would do this in a very similar way to checking the blade. I just put the dial gauge in the miter slot and push the fence up against it and slide it down to the other end. Looking at this, I can see that at the back, my fence is 0.17 millimeters more this way than it is at the front. On my DeWalt table saw, I have these bolts that, when loosened, allow me to reposition the fence. Obviously, check the manual for your table saw for specifics on how to adjust your fence. So I've loosened this off, and I'm just going to adjust until my dial gauge reads 0. And again, you might want to go a little bit beyond your measurement because when you tighten this down, it's going to get a little weird. Next, let's talk about squaring your table saw blade to the table surface. Now, you can grab yourself a square, or if you prefer, a digital angle gauge. I've used both and I haven't noticed massive differences with either, so use whatever you're comfortable with. Make sure to reference off of the table saw surface and not the throat plate. You're looking for any gaps or light shining through between the square and the blade. With the digital gauge, the same principle applies. Zero it on the table, and always make sure to reference against the body of the blade and not a tooth. Make sure to reset the angle stops for both 90 degrees and 45 degrees on your saw. I wouldn't rely on these primarily, but they get you in the ballpark. Finally, let's take our miter gauge and make sure that it's square to the table saw blade. Hold the base of your square firmly against the fence on your miter gauge, and then put the other edge against your table saw blade. You want to make sure that you don't see any gaps or light coming through. The method for adjusting your miter gauge is going to be specific to whatever miter gauge you own, but generally there's going to be some set screws that you can loosen, adjust it so that it's square to the table saw blade, and then tighten it down. That gives you your reference 0 degrees. Ultimately, making adjustments like this is a tedious process, but it's an important one. Don't expect the world from a job site table saw, but you might be surprised by how accurate you can make these machines if you're willing to put in the work. And that work is only going to pay dividends when it comes to doing your woodworking projects. Next, let's talk about the other important component of a table saw, the fence. I should probably go get my fence. The fences on most job site table saws are very short and made out of cheap materials, which means that it's easy for them to deflect or shift around during cuts. One of the best upgrades I made to my job site table saw was adding the bow extender fence. This is a thick piece of 46-inch long extrusion that clamps onto my existing fence. There's a few main benefits to adding something like this to your job site table saw. The extra length provides extra stability when I'm cutting longer pieces. And the thick metal on the extrusion means that it doesn't deflect when I'm doing my cuts. One of the other benefits is the T-track slots along the top and the side that allow me to add feather boards and other jigs. Admittedly, the bow extender fence is one of the pricier upgrades that I've made to my job site table saw, but it's certainly not a requirement. You can make your own supplementary fence using a thick piece of plywood or plastics that you can find at your local home center. Now, do I think that there's benefits to buying this particular product? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, there's plenty of solutions that don't require spending a bunch of dough. Despite being portable, job site table saws are still a pain to move around, and the carts offered by manufacturers don't help solve some of the other problems that we face using them, namely the small table size. Let me show you how I built a cart that has honestly been the biggest level up to my usage of a job site table saw in my shop. This is the cart I built for my job site table saw, and I built it to accomplish 2 goals. The first goal is to make the table saw mobile within my shop. It uses 4 casters on the bottom, and unlike the carts provided by manufacturers, it's easy to turn and pivot and push anywhere that I need to. The second goal that I wanted to solve was adding more surface area for the tabletop of my saw. The first way I accomplished that is with these 2 wings on either side of the table saw. They sit just slightly below the surface of the table saw itself to make sure that nothing gets stuck on them as I'm pushing material through the saw. Now, I could have stopped with these 2 wings, but I found that I still wanted to get more out of this cart, so I turned the cart into a little bit of a transformer. I have extensions on either side that fold up using folding shelf brackets that you can easily find at Home Depot, Lowe's, or on Amazon. These are really, really great when I'm cutting wide sheet goods. The other thing I wanted to improve was my outfeed support. So I have another table back here that folds up, locks into place, and provides a ton of extra support for material as it's leaving the saw. I've also routed extensions to my miter slots into this surface, and that allows my large crosscut sled to push all the way through the blade. In addition to having notoriously small outfeed, job site table saws also have very small infeed, and I wanted to solve that problem as well. So I added this small infeed support table here. All of these folding wings provide a ton of extra functionality for my job site table saw. Not to mention, they take a table saw surface that's about 19 inches by 19 inches and turns it into a surface that's 55 inches wide by 49 inches deep. And they fold away when I don't need them. If you're looking to build a cart like this for your saw, I have a few tips. My first and most important tip is to think about safety. If you're adding something like infeed support to a job site table saw, often it can make it awkward to reach your on and off controls here. Now, if something starts going wrong up top, you want to be able to access these controls quickly and easily, ideally banging them with your knee. My solution to that was to add a secondary safety switch right here. If anything's ever going wrong, I can kick that stop paddle. Next, the track for the fence on most job site table saws extends outward. Don't forget to think about clearance for it when you're building wings on the side. Also, don't forget to account for the dust port on the back of your job site table saw. Remember, it's going to move back and forth as you tilt your blade, so leave some space to account for that. If you're thinking about making a cart like this for your own job site table saw, my biggest piece of advice is to just not stress out about it. It's a little bit fiddly, it's gonna take some time to align the wings to the table saw surface, but stick with it. And if you make a mistake, it's okay. There are mistakes all over this cart, but at the end of the day, it's just 3/4 inch plywood and it's shop furniture at the end of the day. So there you have it. With a few simple tweaks and some upgrades, any job site table saw can play in the big leagues, even if you're in a small shop. If you want to see this table saw and cart in action, check out this video over here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.